Have you ever looked up at the night sky and felt like something was looking back at you? I mean, really looking, like something that knows your name. Well, that feeling you get, it's real, and what happened to me 3 years ago proved it. I'm Samantha Blake. I'm 29 now, and I don't even know how to... some days I think I'm completely losing my mind, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me back up because... Wait, where was I going with this? Oh, right. The story. My story. It doesn't start with was it even an abduction? I don't know what to call it anymore. Some days, I think it was the most beautiful experience of my life. Other days, I'm like, what if they were lying? What if I'm just... Sorry, I do this. I jump around. My therapist says it's trauma response, but... Anyway, let me try to tell this properly. So I grew up in this really conservative Lutheran household in Duluth, right? My dad, Pastor William Blake, he ran the Good Shepherd Lutheran Church on Central Avenue, and my mom, Nancy Blake, she was like the perfect pastor's wife. You know what I mean? She had the whole thing down. The casseroles, the church potlucks, the prayer circles. And then there's me, little Samantha, telling everyone about the light people I see in my bedroom at night. I mean, from the time I was 4 or 5, I was seeing these beings. And here's the thing, I thought they were beautiful then. But now I'm like, what if they weren't? What if they were grooming me from childhood? Oh my God, I can't breathe when I think about this sometimes. The first time I remember seeing them clearly, I was maybe 6 years old. It was winter in Duluth. You know how brutal those winters are, right? Snow piled up to the windows, wind howling off Lake Superior like something was dying. I woke up in the middle of the night and there were 3 of them standing at the foot of my little twin bed. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with this soft, almost translucent quality to them. They glowed, but not like a light bulb, more like moonlight on water, and they communicated with me, but not with words. It was more like these downloads of information directly into my mind. They told me I was special, that I had a purpose, that they were watching over me. At 6 years old, I thought this was normal. I thought everyone had guardian angels who looked like tall, glowing people. But when I started talking about it, oh my God, my parents freaked out. My dad would sit me down for these really intense prayer sessions, asking God to cast out whatever demons were influencing his daughter. And my mom, she would just cry, like she thought she was failing as a mother because her kid was seeing things. I remember one particular night, I must have been 7 or 8, I'd had another visit, and I was so excited, I ran into their bedroom at 2 a.m. to tell them about what the light people had shown me. It was this vision of the Earth from space, spinning slowly, and all these lines of energy connecting different points on the surface. Beautiful, right? But my dad's face when I told him, oh my God, he looked terrified. He called Pastor Johnson from the neighboring parish, and they both came over the next evening. They prayed over me for hours, hands on my head, speaking in tongues, asking Jesus to protect me from the deceiver. I was so confused because the beings felt loving to me, not evil, but everybody kept telling me they were demons, so I started to doubt myself. So by the time I was in elementary school, I went to Duluth Heights Elementary. I learned to keep my mouth shut about the visitations, but they never stopped, If anything, they got more frequent as I got older, and the beings, they started. I thought they were teaching me things. Consciousness expansion techniques, energy healing, how to access what they called the universal information field. But what if it wasn't teaching? What if it was programming? I wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes thinking, what if everything I think I know about consciousness is just what they wanted me to believe? Elementary school was rough in other ways too. I was this weird pastor's kid who would sometimes know things I shouldn't know. I'd know when Mrs. Anderson was going to be absent before she even called in sick. Or I'd know that Jimmy Morrison was going to fall off the monkey bars before it happened. Kids started calling me weird, and I didn't understand why. I had my first panic attack in 4th grade. We were doing this science unit on space, and the teacher showed us a documentary about the universe. When they got to the part about how vast space is, how many galaxies there are, I just lost it. Couldn't breathe, heart racing, felt like I was going to die. The school nurse called my mom, told her I'd had some kind of episode. My mom took me to Dr. Patricia Hernandez. She was our family doctor then too, actually. Dr. Hernandez said it was probably just anxiety, maybe overwhelmed by the concept of infinity. She wasn't wrong, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I was overwhelmed because something deep inside me remembered being out there, in that vast darkness between stars. High school was, oh God, high school was rough. I went to Duluth East High School, and I was this weird pastor's kid who didn't fit in anywhere. Too spiritual for the regular kids, too unconventional for the church kids. I started having these out-of-body experiences during meditation, which I was doing in secret because, meditation wasn't exactly encouraged in our household. I discovered meditation through this book I found at the library, Journey of Souls by Michael Newton, changed my whole perspective on life and death and consciousness. I'd sneak out to the woods behind our house and practice these techniques, trying to quiet my mind, trying to understand what was happening to me. And even then, even as a teenager, I had this feeling like I was being watched, not just by the beings, but have you ever felt like you're in a fishbowl? Like everything you do is being observed and recorded? I couldn't shake that feeling. The beings were still visiting me, but now they were more educational, I guess. They'd show me visions of other worlds, other civilizations. Sometimes I'd wake up with knowledge I didn't have before, like suddenly understanding complex mathematical concepts or knowing details about historical events that we hadn't covered in school yet. One time, I think I was a junior, I woke up after a visitation and found these strange marks on my arm, 3 small triangular marks in a perfect line. They weren't painful, but they were definitely real. I showed them to my mom, told her I didn't know how they got there. She made me an appointment with a dermatologist, but by the time we got there a week later, the marks had faded. The dermatologist said they looked like pressure marks, maybe from sleeping on something with a textured surface. But I knew better. I knew they were from the beings, some kind of marking or testing. But how do you tell your Lutheran mother that aliens are conducting experiments on you? By the time I graduated, I knew I had to get out of Duluth. I applied to the University of Wisconsin-Madison and somehow got accepted into their psychology program. My parents were thrilled. Finally, their daughter was going to do something normal, College was where everything really opened up for me. I discovered there was this whole world of consciousness research happening. I started reading about remote viewing, astral projection, interdimensional contact. And I realized that what I'd been experiencing my whole life wasn't some demonic influence. It was actual contact with higher dimensional beings. Or was it? Here's something most people don't understand about consciousness. We think we're just these physical bodies walking around, but that's like saying a TV is just the screen. We're multidimensional beings operating on multiple frequency levels simultaneously. Most people just aren't tuned in to perceive beyond the third-dimensional reality. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. What is my life right now? I always do this. I start explaining the metaphysics before I tell you what actually happened. My therapist says I do this to avoid the trauma, but... Sorry, where was I? Oh, right, college. So, at Madison, I found this group, the Consciousness Research Club. They met every Thursday night in the basement of the psychology building. There were maybe 12 of us, all psychology majors or philosophy majors, all interested in the deeper questions about reality and consciousness. We did experiments, tried remote viewing, attempted telepathic communication, even some group meditation sessions. And I was good at it. Really good. Scary good, actually. I could describe locations I'd never been to with startling accuracy. I could pick up on other people's thoughts and emotions without even trying. There was this one experiment we did where we tried to remote view a target location that had been randomly selected and sealed in an envelope. When it was my turn, I went into this meditative state, and suddenly I was seeing this massive body of water, dark and still, surrounded by trees. There was something in the sky above it, something that didn't belong. A craft of some kind, organic-looking, pulsing with soft bioluminescent light. I drew what I saw, described it in detail. When we opened the envelope later, the target location was Bayfront Festival Park here in Duluth, right on the shore of Lake Superior. The same park where everything would happen years later. Coincidence? Maybe, but it felt like more than that. My junior year, I started having these episodes where I'd lose time. I'd be studying in the library and suddenly realize I'd been sitting there for 4 hours with no memory of what I'd been doing. Or I'd wake up in the morning with mud on my shoes and no recollection of going outside. One time I woke up on a park bench at 3 a.m. with no memory of how I got there. My roommate said I'd been gone all night, but I remembered going to bed around 10 p.m. Campus security found me and brought me back to the dorm. The dean suggested I see a counselor. The counselor, Dr. Margaret Stone, was actually really helpful. She didn't dismiss my experiences outright, but she also didn't automatically believe them. She helped me develop coping strategies for the anxiety and the missing time episodes. She introduced me to the concept of dissociation, how trauma can cause the mind to disconnect from reality as a protective mechanism. But even Dr. Stone couldn't explain the physical evidence, like the time I woke up with a small, perfectly circular scar on my shoulder that hadn't been there the day before, or the way electronics would malfunction around me when I was having an episode, watches stopping, cell phones glitching, laptop screens flickering. Senior year was when everything started to escalate. The visitations became more frequent, more intense. Instead of just seeing the beings in my room, I started having full contact experiences. I'd be pulled out of my body, taken to their craft, shown things that I couldn't quite understand or remember clearly afterward. The first time it happened, I woke up on my dorm room floor at 4 a.m., fully dressed but with clothes that were damp and smelled like ozone. My roommate was fast asleep, didn't hear anything. I had this vague memory of being in a room with curved walls that seemed to pulse with their own light, of beings examining me, of some kind of procedure being performed. But here's the thing, and this is where I start to sound completely crazy. I couldn't tell if these experiences were positive or negative. The beings seemed benevolent, even loving, but there was something underneath that felt clinical, like I was a subject in an experiment rather than a participant in some cosmic awakening. I tried to talk to my parents about what was happening, but that was a disaster. My dad immediately assumed I was involved in drugs or some kind of cult. My mom just cried and begged me to come home, to get back to church, to pray harder. They couldn't understand that this wasn't something I was choosing. It was something that was happening to me, whether I wanted it or not. The breaking point came during finals week of my senior year. I was in the middle of taking my abnormal psychology exam, when suddenly I wasn't in the classroom anymore. I was in that curved room again, lying on what felt like a table made of some kind of crystalline material. The beings were around me, and one of them was doing something to my head. I could feel pressure, a strange tingling sensation behind my left ear. When I came back to awareness, I was still sitting in the exam room, but 3 hours had passed. The proctor was shaking my shoulder, asking if I was all right. My exam paper was blank except for my name at the top. I had no memory of the lost time except for that brief flash of being somewhere else. I failed that exam, obviously, had to explain to my professor what had happened, which was humiliating and terrifying at the same time. How do you tell someone that you think you were abducted by aliens in the middle of a psychology exam? Especially when you're studying to become a psychologist yourself. Dr. Stone referred me to a psychiatrist, Dr. Brian Foster. He put me on antidepressants and suggested that I might be having dissociative episodes triggered by stress. The medication helped with the anxiety, but it also seemed to dull my psychic abilities. The visitations became less frequent, less vivid. I graduated, barely, and moved back to Duluth. I felt like a failure. Here I was with a psychology degree, but I couldn't even figure out what was happening in my own mind. Was I mentally ill? Was I having genuine contact with extraterrestrial beings? Was I just stressed out and imagining things? I got the job at the Duluth Public Library because it was quiet, peaceful. Books don't judge you. Books don't ask uncomfortable questions about your mental health. I could lose myself in the stacks, organizing and reorganizing, helping people find what they were looking for. But the beings didn't forget about me. Even on the medication, even in the quiet sanctuary of the library, I could feel them watching, waiting. Sometimes I'd be reshelving books and suddenly get this overwhelming urge to look up at the skylights like something was up there just beyond my vision. The missing time episodes continued too, but less frequently. I'd lose an hour here, 30 minutes there. Once I came back to awareness standing in the middle of the fiction section with an armful of books about UFOs and alien encounters. I didn't remember selecting them, but there they were. I started reading those books, trying to find other people who'd had similar experiences. And I found them, hundreds of stories that sounded just like mine. The childhood visitations, the missing time, the sense of being watched and studied. Some of these people had physical evidence too, scars, implants, unusual blood work. That's when I started to wonder, what if this wasn't mental illness at all? What if this was something real, something that was happening to thousands of people all over the world, but we were all too scared or too stigmatized to talk about it openly? The thought was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it meant that beings from somewhere else were taking people against their will, conducting experiments, manipulating our lives in ways we couldn't understand. But liberating because it meant I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. So after college, I moved back to Duluth because, honestly, I didn't know what else to do. I got this job at the Duluth Public Library on West 2nd Street, and I was living in this tiny apartment on East 4th Street right near the lake. And the beings, they were still visiting, but less frequently. It was like they were waiting for something. That something happened on March 15th, 2022. I remember the date exactly because it was my 26th birthday and I'd just gotten off work. I was walking home from the library around 9:30 p.m. It gets dark early in March in Minnesota, you know, and I was cutting through Bayfront Festival Park because it's faster than taking the streets. I remember everything about that walk so clearly it's like it's burned into my memory. The way the snow crunched under my boots, how the wind off Lake Superior cut through my jacket like ice, the smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace mixing with the clean cold air. I had my headphones in, listening to some meditation music, trying to decompress from a particularly stressful day at work. I'm walking along the shore of Lake Superior and suddenly I get this overwhelming urge to look up. Like, this wasn't my thought, it was like someone else's thought in my head, which should have been my first red flag, right? But I look up anyway, and when I do, the sky just opens. I know that sounds crazy, and believe me, I've questioned my sanity every single day since then. But that's the only way I can describe it. It was like someone took the night sky and just parted it like a curtain, and through this opening, I see this massive ship. But here's the thing. It wasn't beautiful like in the movies. It was terrifying. This thing was organic looking, almost like it was grown rather than built, and it had these flowing, curved surfaces that seemed to pulse with this soft, bioluminescent light. But the light felt wrong, you know, like, it was beautiful, but in a way that made my skin crawl. I'm standing there, and I can't move. And I don't mean paralyzed in a mystical way, I mean literally frozen with terror. Every instinct in my body was screaming, run, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of concrete. And then I hear this voice in my head. Not my voice, but someone else's. And it says, Samantha, we've been waiting for you. And the way it said my name, oh my God, I still get chills. It was like they knew me. Like they'd been watching me my whole life. Which they had been, right? But at that moment, it didn't feel loving or protective. It felt like I was prey. The next thing I know, I'm not standing by the lake anymore. And this is where it gets really fucked up because I don't remember how I got there. 1 second, I'm by the water, the next I'm inside the ship and there are 3 beings with me. They were taller than humans, maybe 7 feet, and they had these elongated features. But here's what really messed me up. They looked exactly like the beings I'd been seeing since childhood. Same faces, same energy, and I realized, oh my God, they've been grooming me my entire life for this moment. One of them stepped forward, and I somehow knew this was the one who'd been visiting me since childhood, my protector. But standing there in that room, they didn't feel protective at all. They felt clinical, cold, like I was a specimen. And they communicated, not through words, but through this direct consciousness transfer, that they were called the Luminal Council. They exist primarily in the 7th dimension, but they can lower their vibrational frequency to interact with 3rd-dimensional beings like us. At least that's what they told me. But how do I know it's true? How do I know anything they told me is true? They showed me to this room that was like nothing I'd ever seen. The walls weren't really walls, they were more like energy barriers that you could see through into what looked like infinite space filled with stars and galaxies. Beautiful, right? But it felt like a cage. Like they were showing me the universe I could never reach. And in the center was this chair that seemed to be made of some kind of crystalline material. And when they told me to sit in it, every fiber of my being was screaming, no. But I couldn't resist. I literally could not make my body refuse. We need to upgrade your consciousness interface, the being explained. You've been preparing for this your whole life. Upgrade. Like I'm a fucking computer. Like my consciousness isn't my own but some kind of software they can modify. And here's where it gets really intense. They had me lie down in this chair. And suddenly I felt this warm sensation starting at the top of my head and flowing down through my entire body. At first it felt incredible. Like every cell in my body was being energized and upgraded. But then it started to hurt. Not physical pain, something worse. It felt like they were rewiring my brain, changing fundamental parts of who I am. And I couldn't stop them. But then they did something that I really wasn't expecting. They inserted this small device, it looked like a tiny crystal, right behind my left ear. And oh my God, I felt everything. The pressure, the invasion, this weird tingling sensation that spread through my head like electricity. This will allow you to access the Akashic records more directly, they explained, and to communicate with us without having to wait for visitations. But what they didn't tell me, and what I'm still figuring out 3 years later, is what else it does. Because sometimes I hear voices that aren't mine. Sometimes I know things I shouldn't know. Sometimes I wake up with memories that aren't my own. The whole procedure took maybe an hour, and then suddenly I'm back by the lake, just standing there like nothing happened. But my phone shows it's now 2:17 a.m. I'd lost almost 5 hours, and that's when the real nightmare started. For the next 3 days, I had constant headaches and this weird drainage from my left ear, not blood. This clear, slightly greenish fluid that would just randomly start dripping. But worse than that, I couldn't trust my own mind anymore. I'd be at work at the library, and suddenly I'd know detailed information about books I'd never read, or I'd have vivid memories of places I'd never been, or I'd look at someone and instantly know their deepest secrets. Was this the upgrade they gave me, or was I having a complete psychotic break? I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I'd stand in front of the mirror and not recognize myself. My eyes looked different, brighter, but empty, like someone else was looking out through them. So finally, I went to see Dr. Patricia Hernandez at the Duluth Family Medicine Clinic on West Superior Street, and I was crying before I even sat down, like sobbing uncontrollably. She probably thought I was having a nervous breakdown, which maybe I was. I didn't tell her about the abduction. I mean, how could I? But I said I was having ear problems and headaches and that I felt like I was losing my mind. She looked in my left ear and immediately got this confused expression. "There's some unusual scar tissue here," she said, "and what appears to be a small foreign object. Have you had any recent trauma to this area?" And that's when I completely lost it. I started hyperventilating, sobbing, telling her I didn't know what was real anymore. She had to give me a sedative. She referred me to Dr. Michael Stevens, an ENT specialist at Essentia Health, and he did this whole battery of tests, CT scans, MRIs, hearing tests. And here's the crazy part. They found what they described as a small metallic foreign object embedded deep in my ear canal. Dr. Stevens was baffled. "I've never seen anything like this," he told me. "It's not showing up clearly on imaging, but there's definitely something there. We could do surgery to remove it, but given its location, there would be significant risks." And I'm sitting there thinking, what if removing it kills me? What if that's the whole point? What if they put it there knowing I'd try to take it out? But here's where things got really difficult. I tried to tell my best friend Kelly Morrison, we'd been friends since high school, about what happened, and she looked at me like I'd completely lost my mind. "Sam, you're scaring me," she said. "This sounds like a psychotic break. You need to see a therapist, like now." And the way she said it, not with concern, but with disgust, like I was contagious, like my insanity might rub off on her. So I tried telling my parents, thinking maybe they'd understand since they were religious and believed in angels and stuff. Oh my God, that was a mistake. My dad immediately organized this intervention with half the church elders. They prayed over me for 3 hours, trying to cast out what they believed were demonic influences. And the whole time, I'm thinking, what if they're right? What if these weren't benevolent beings, but demons? What if everything I think I know is a lie? My mom just cried the entire time, and afterwards she pulled me aside and said, "Samantha, I love you, but if you keep talking about this alien nonsense, people are going to think our family is crazy. Your father could lose his position at the church." So that was it. I was completely alone with this experience, and the isolation was devastating, you know. Like, I'd had this incredible, terrifying, life-changing experience, and I couldn't share it with anyone without being labeled as mentally ill or demon-possessed. I started seeing Dr. James Mitchell, a therapist at the Duluth Behavioral Health Center on West 3rd Street, and I was a mess. Like, I would sit in his office and just sob for the entire hour. I couldn't even form coherent sentences half the time. But here's where the healing really started. I was researching online, trying to find anyone else who'd had similar experiences, and I found this support group called Contact Experiencers of the Great Lakes. They met every month at the Duluth Community Center on West 2nd Street. The group was led by this woman named Dr. Claire Watson. She was a retired psychiatrist who'd had her own contact experience 20 years earlier, and there were maybe 8 other people there, all with stories that made mine seem normal. We did group energy healing work. I know that sounds weird, but remember, I now had access to these expanded consciousness abilities. We would do these meditation sessions where we'd connect with what Dr. Watson called the healing field of universal consciousness. And slowly, really slowly, I started to heal. Not just from the trauma of the experience itself, but from the isolation and invalidation I'd experienced afterward. 3 years later, I'm living a completely different life than I ever imagined. I help other experiences process their experiences through workshops and online support groups. But even now, even after 3 years of therapy and support groups and trying to make sense of all this, I still don't know what's real. Some days I feel grateful for the experience. Other days, I wonder if I'm just a puppet. The night sky didn't just open for me that March evening. It shattered my entire understanding of reality, of who I am, of what's possible. And I'm still picking up the pieces, trying to figure out which ones are real. That's the thing about contact experiences. They don't give you answers. They just give you better questions. And right now, I'm still asking.